So my name is Adam. I work in marketing communications for TreePeople. I'm so excited to have you today for this Learn at Home that we're doing in conjunction with Dashboard.Earth. They're a really wonderful partner, and they have an absolutely amazing app that shows all these ways that you can get involved in creating change throughout your neighborhood. It is really, really wonderful, and really, really excited to do this today. Our Learn at Home program started in the pandemic. We really wanted to make sure that, you know, educational tools were fun and engaging, but also accessible. And, you know, we wanted to keep that going and not lose that even as things are opening up. And we're kind of returning into that new normal. So thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday. Really appreciated. Just to let you know, this is for those who might not be familiar with TreePeople. We were founded in 1973. This is our 50th anniversary. We were founded in the hills above Riverside, actually, in the San Bernardino Mountains by a 15-year-old boy. And that energy is something of, you know, taking action and taking change, but also making it really fun is something that we've continued to this day. We've planted over 3 million trees with 3 million people. And we're really excited to, you know, have you as part of that and part of that TreePeople family. So just want to throw that out there and say that we have workshops like this. We have planting events. Right now it is tree care summer. All the trees that we planted, we're going to be taking care of them through the long, hot summer. And, you know, if you want to help us and be a part of that, we would love to have you out. You can go to treepeople.org/volunteer and find an event near you. All right. So again, this is TreePeople's Learn at Home program. You know, this is sponsored by Arla, but we're also doing this today with Dashboard.Earth. Sorry about that. And again, this is a really, really fun. This is going to be really, really fun. It's the first in our Ask an Arborist series, where we have our arborist, Brian Behar, and we took questions and we're going to answer those. And we're also going to have a Q&A at the end. All right, and at this point in time, I want to kick it over to Juliana from Dashboard.Earth.
Thank you, Adam. Next slide. Hello, everyone. So I'm Juliana Mendez. I am the program manager for Dashboard.Earth. Dashboard.Earth is an interactive tree care experience. Dashboard.Earth is an app for climate actions. You will be able to discover an interactive tree care experience, as well as different climate actions in Los Angeles. Most recently, for some of you that might be on the call that will answer questions later, you might have noticed that you were able to submit your questions to an arborist. So that is a program that we are rolling out in partnership with TreePeople. And we're really excited that residents will be able to ask an arborist directly. Next slide. When you download Dashboard.Earth, you'll be able to have a lot of different experiences. Starting with the first one, you can browse through climate actions by theme of what interests you. So here it might be trees. In another setting, it might be composting, gardening, water conservation, as well as you'll be able to discover recommended solutions from 10 local partners that we also partner up with. So here we have TreePeople, City Plants, as well as LA Waterkeeper, and many other partners in Los Angeles. And then we also have a section where you can join our paths and have a step-by-step guide through different climate actions. So for this setting about how to register your tree, our app sends reminders of when to water your tree, if it's a new tree, if it's an old tree, as well as, you know, you can submit a picture to an arborist. In this case, it would be Brian, and then he's able to answer your questions at this event. And then as well, most importantly, what we really find huge value in our app is that we're able to track your impact on local climate actions that you take. You have a friend, they download the app, you all can compare your impact, your climate action. And so that's something that we really, our users really enjoy to see is their individual impact. Next slide. So I would really appreciate if you all can download Dashboard.Earth today, start your climate journey. We're really excited to be partnering with amazing nonprofits like TreePeople, as well as other organizations. So you can scan this QR code, and the QR code will lead you to the App Store that will automatically download our app. And you'll be entered into the Tree Needs People, and that's the path that TreePeople has done with us. So we're excited. And also there's my contact information if anyone has any questions, or if you yourself are an organization that would like to partner up with us. We are always excited to have partners in Los Angeles. So thank you so much. I'll pass it over back to Adam.
Thank you so much. I really would encourage you to download the Dashboard.Earth app. It is a really, really wonderful tool, and we'll be using it more for the Ask an Arborist series that we're doing. And that's the way that you'll be able to, submit your information beforehand. You can send us photos, you can send us questions, and that helps a long way in being able to really identify and give you those answers that you're looking for your specific issues. And again, we're so excited to be partnering with Dashboard.Earth and to be on their platform. It is really, really, truly wonderful. So really encourage you to give that a download. All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce you to Brian Vehar. Hi, Brian.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, so Brian is an arborist here at TreePeople, and he's going to be helping you out. So we have the questions here that have been submitted through Dashboard.Earth, and he's had the chance to go through. He's had the chance to look at them. He's had the chance to research what those issues are, and we'll be going through some of those and letting him share his knowledge to help you out. And again, if you have any more information or if you want some follow-up, throw it in the chat, and we'll be able to do that in that Q&A. Or if it's something that's a little bit more detailed, if it's something wonky, don't be afraid about it. Shoot us an email at info@treepeople.org, and we'll make sure that he sees it and that our team is able to help you out. All right. So.
Hey, it's me.
So Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, everyone. First of all, I just want a huge shout out to the communication teams, Adam, Alex, and Bliss. Also, Juliana at Dashboard.Earth. What an incredible resource for us. So many of us have climate anxiety, and having a platform that allows us to take action and get involved in the movement is such a valuable resource. So thank you. Thank you all for having me today. My name is Brian Vehar. I'm the community forestry foreman for El Monte. So historically, TreePeople has largely operated in Los Angeles, and it's not until just recently that we've been able to move back out into the San Gabriel Valley. I'm the foreman for their expansion into El Monte, so that means that I am training a young staff of community foresters to eventually become certified arborists, as well as executing a grant to plant over 800 trees in El Monte, one of the hottest neighborhoods and one of the most shade-poor areas in Los Angeles. So we're super excited to be there. Also, I happen to be an ISA certified arborist. The ISA is the International Society of Arboriculture. They are a international organization that certifies arborists worldwide. And I also happen to be a tree risk assessor as well. So I'm qualified to make judgments based on the hazard potential of certain trees as well. This is one of my favorite things to do, is reach out to people and talk trees. If you know me personally on any personal level, you know that I pretty much can't shut up about trees because I love them so much. So TreePeople is just the absolute best place for me to be. So I really love this this program. It gives me an opportunity to reach people on a broader scope about tree care and tree maintenance decisions. It's a really intimidating thing that, in this digital age, we have so much information on the internet on how to care for trees and select trees. And not all the information's been vetted. So I think it's really important to enlist the help of certified professionals to help you make rational decisions about how you care for trees. And, arborists, sometimes they're expensive, and that can be a limiting factor on our access to that good information. So it makes it really a valuable resource to be able to reach a broader audience with their tree care needs. And so I'm just very thankful that I have this platform and this opportunity to reach all of you. I'm going to move through these questions as succinctly as possible while giving you some valuable information, what I hope is some valuable information. But if you feel that you have some questions that weren't addressed or need more clarification, please do take the opportunity to reach out to info@treepeople.org to follow up with any additional questions. I love answering people's questions, and if I don't know, I can find out from somebody who does. So without further ado, I'd love to just launch into the questions. All right. Number 1. All right. Afrocarpus falcatus. I read that it does not ruin foundations and sidewalks, but also that they can grow tremendously tall, over 60 feet. How close can I plant it to the house? I want to grow it as a privacy hedge. And how close can they be grown to each other? I have 2 young Afrocarpus trees. This is a fantastic question. So Afrocarpus falcatus, what is commonly known as the African fern pine, is a tree that's commonly grown as a hedge. In fact, there are many specimens of hedges that, if left alone and given enough space and resources, could actually turn into pretty magnificent specimen trees. Having said that, the African fern pine is a specimen that is commonly planted close together to grow into each other and make a really decent, actually pretty densely foliated privacy hedge. So the question, if they can get so tall, then would that make them a good option for planting next to my house? And the answer is yes, actually. So I would say, how close you want to plant to the house is really dependent on if you want access to that side of your house. Say you have some irrigation valves or a water spigot or something else that you need access to, you want to get behind the hedge. I'd say planting it between 4 and 5 feet away from the house. Also, how close you want to plant together. Well, that really depends on a couple of variables, and I want to go over those with you. So if you have this tree planted on the north side of your house, under the eaves of your house, it'll be in perpetual shade and it's not going to grow very quickly. So it may benefit you to plant them closer together to more efficiently and more rapidly gain that dense privacy hedge. Now, if you plant this on the side of your house that is in the southern side, the southwestern side, and it has plenty of sunlight and plenty of irrigation, then this specimen could actually grow rather quickly and what might need some routine maintenance. And in that case, you can afford to space them out a little further away from each other. So as a general rule, I would say placing these within 4 to 5 feet away from each other should be sufficient enough space to allow them to eventually kind of come together and give you that nice screen that you're looking for. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about why it is that certain trees can grow into hedges and certain trees might struggle in this scenario. So the African fern pine actually is more related to conifers than it is to other broadleaf trees, which might not be immediately clear from this image, but it is true. There are both male and female varieties of this tree. Now, if you were to get the female variety, then you would get the cone-bearing variety, which could be somewhat messy. So generally, you're going to see male varieties of this tree made available at nurseries. Also, in regards to its root plate, if this tree were allowed to grow to its full maximum potential, then you certainly would have a pretty robust root system. And that root system could eventually interfere with your utilities, or it could also affect your foundation. That's something that none of us want, right? But if you were to keep it hedged and small, what happens is the tree self-optimizes. What does that mean? That means that keeping the shrub small is also going to keep the roots from growing too prolifically. Trees are in tree branches and tree roots are in constant communication with each other through hormonal signals. These signals sort of trigger growth to balance the resources out. So the more branches and leaves you have, the more roots you're going to grow. The more roots you grow, the more necessary branches and leaves are going to grow, right? So that's called the root to shoot ratio. And we are manually enforcing a smaller root to shoot ratio if we keep these nice, tidy, and small. So you really won't have to worry about the root damage if you plant these close to your house. That's a really good question. All right, next slide. Is this tree still alive? Last winter, the branch never grew back. So this is a tougher slide. Something I'll talk about is diagnosis. So the diagnostic approach from Arborist requires that I be on site, I take a close look at the tree, I'm kind of measuring site conditions, checking what the irrigation is, I'm manually looking at the tree. But unfortunately, online, I don't have those resources available. So I'm operating on a pretty limited information basis. So I tried zooming into this image and I couldn't conclusively identify the species of this tree because as I zoomed in, it got a little pixelated. So what I can do for you is give you a couple of tools to kind of check for yourself if this tree is still alive. So this is a really common issue, right? Maybe you have a tree that you haven't identified, you don't know if it's deciduous, or sometimes after you transplant a tree, it'll undergo a bit of transplant shock, it'll defoliate, and you will be unsure of whether or not this tree is still alive. So a good way to determine whether or not your tree is alive, well, there's a couple of different things you can do. Number one, you can take the tip of the branch and you can bend it to see how pliable it is. So living trees have moisture in them and they have these cellulose fibers that give the tree tissues pliability. So if you were to bend it and it does bend without snapping, that means that there is still some moisture in the tree, which ostensibly would mean that there is still some of the vascular tissue functioning, the vascular tissue being the water conducting tissue, that is. Number two, if you do break off the tip of a branch and you don't see any green on the inside, but rather see it is brown, then that at least means the branch is dead. Now, if you take a few branches and do that over and over again, breaking off the tip, it seems like it might be harmful to the tree, but it's really, really minor. Then you would be able to determine whether or not any of the branches are still growing at their tips. So this is more information that would help you determine whether or not this tree is still viable. Finally, something that's really a classic tool to be used and something we do in the field all the time is called the scratch test. What's a scratch test? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. You take your fingernail or a knife or some pruners and you very lightly, very cautiously peel back some of the bark. You could do it at multiple places in the tree. Maybe two places would be halfway up the trunk and maybe at the base of the tree. Not enough to wound the tree. You're not trying to dig in deep, but just below the bark. And what you should see if the tree is still alive, even if it's deciduous, is a green layer, a green moist layer. That's what's called the vascular cambium. So the vascular cambium is a moist green sleeve that extends from the base of the tree all the way up to the root tips. And this is really the heart of the tree, honestly. All the tissues internally on a tree are created by this vascular cambium layer, which is only a couple cell layers deep. So if you do the scratch test and you're seeing discoloration or no green at all, or if it's dry or the bark is peeling off without showing any moisture inside, then, there's a good chance that the tree might have perished. And, that's unfortunate. I feel like, people plant trees, they're not usually very inexpensive. That is to say, they're a bit of resource intensive. And if you've been caring for something for some time and it dies, then that could be really frustrating. But the message I want to get to you guys on this topic is that even us at TreePeople, who have hundreds of years of experience between the staff and all are on the cutting edge of tree science and technology, we plant hundreds and hundreds of trees every week all throughout the Southern California. even some of those trees are going to die. You can do everything right and still, unfortunately, trees are living organisms, and some of them are going to be more resilient than others, and some of them are, unfortunately, are going to perish in the process. That's just the reality of planting trees. So if your tree is dead, I would hope that you would replace it with another tree. It looks like you have a good amount of space there, nice sunny space. Maybe not planting the same species. This tree might have died as a result. If it did indeed die, it might have died as a result of poor soil conditions or some site conditions that might not have been conducive to good growth. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Okay, next slide. Bugs are attacking our eucalyptus. Is there a solution, and what are they? Ooh, looks kind of nasty, right? Because I can't see the entire eucalyptus, I can't give you a positive ID on the exact species of eucalyptus this is. Most likely by the bluish silvery leaves, it looks to be either a red ironbark or a blue gum. And what we see on the leaves here are shredded margins. It looks like somebody came up with a hole puncher and kind of like punched all over the leaves, though I doubt that's what actually happened. So what you see are little black specks all over the plant, and it might appear initially that those are insects, but those aren't insects. Actually, that is the remainder of the feeding insects, the feces, I should say, of the feeding insects. If these insects are most generally, now I can't conclusively identify them because I can't see them, but most often eucalyptus leaf damage like this is consistent with one of two species, either the eucalyptus tortoise beetle or the eucalyptus leaf beetle. Both of them are pretty prolific in our environment. They are invasive species. Eucalyptus are not native species, and so it stands to reason that they would attract non-native invasive species to feed on them. And so we're seeing some pretty extensive leaf damage here. And your question is there a solution? Well, yes, there are several solutions. But before I get to any chemical controls of these species, I wanted to talk to you about this concept called integrated pest management, or IPM. So this concept of IPM was borrowed from the agricultural field. Basically, farm growers had a certain crop, and inevitably, you're always going to have diseases, pathogens, and pests. It's inescapable. We live in an ecosystem. There's just no way around it. And so what farmers would do is say, okay, well, I have to weigh the value of the crop with the damage that's being done, and the cost of treating the issue. Is the cost treating the issue more than what is being the value of the damage that this pest is creating? If it is, then perhaps it's more effective to simply let the pests die out on their own. And this concept is something we heavily borrow on in the arboricultural field. So what I'll say to you is, judging by this photo, it looks pretty extensive, but if this damage is localized to only a few branches or a small part of the tree, then you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to use pesticides on this tree? Because there are inherent risks with pesticides. Number one being that some of the most effective pesticides also hurt non-target organisms. So non-target organisms are natural predators of these pests, or they're organisms that parasitize or outcompete these pests. So we live in an ecosystem. There's, pest populations are fluid. They rise and fall because of the presence of certain resources. And so we have to consider, like, all right, is this simply a cosmetic issue, or is it actually injuring the tree? Now, perhaps you might not be able to make that decision on your own. You might have to have somebody come, either provide more photos to show the, the extent of this damage, or have an arborist come out and check it out and see, like, oh, this is actually infesting the entire tree, and we've reached what's called an action threshold, or a level at which intervention is needed. So I'll say that aesthetic thresholds and injury thresholds are usually far apart. Something that might be cosmetically like injurious to a tree might not actually long-term affect the health of the tree. And so if your goal is to make sure your tree is healthy for the long term, then I would say, you know, and the infestation is not too widespread, I would say the best thing to do is actually nothing, believe it or not. It's a hard thing. Sometimes it's hard to see damage and kind of step back and do nothing about it. But, you know, when you think about it, if you use chemical controls on these pests and you kind of reduce their numbers, you're also reducing the numbers of other organisms that might outcompete them in the future. And so the following growth season, you may actually experience a boom of those initial pests that you're trying to target in the first place. And so you might actually long-term be doing more harm than good. Also, you might be inadvertently harming pollinators, and that's not something we want to do, right? So having said all that, if you do have a tree that is aggressively infested with these beetles and it is it's reached the injury threshold, then there are broad spectrum fungicides, or I'm sorry, insecticides that are available, like imidacloprid, neonicotinoids that can be injected into the tree. Foliar sprays don't really work on larger trees because it's just not practical to treat the entire canopy from the ground or even from a bucket truck, right? And you don't want pesticide drift going into your neighbor's yard or into your own yard or onto non-target hosts as well. So there are, I would say my best advice for you is to have somebody give a more comprehensive evaluation of your canopy. There are chemical controls available, but only if it's actually affecting the long-term health of the tree. I see in the chat there are some follow-up questions, so I'll definitely try and get to those at the very end, but I want to make sure that we get to all the slides initially first. Next slide. I know species diversity is important, especially in an urban forest, but shouldn't we still try to plant native trees whenever possible? Also, why aren't more native trees stocked in nurseries or found on city-approved tree pallets, especially small to medium-sized trees? This is a fantastic question. And I love that you started off with species diversity, and we'll get to that. So shouldn't we still try to plant native trees whenever possible? The answer is a resounding yes, yes. Native trees are so important to our urban forest. The reason is that native trees are little ecosystems into themselves. They support hundreds and hundreds of different organisms, from microorganisms to fungi to invertebrates and pollinators, migratory birds, and domestic birds as well. So, you know, the decline of a lot of those endemic species and native species is because of habitat loss. So planting little oases of native gardens and native trees here and there will allow them to, find sustenance and find habitat even in our most densely populated areas. Also, native trees are generally, and I want to really emphasize that term, generally adapted to our local regional climate. Now, obviously, climate change is rendering that point a little moot. Things are changing. Also, I should say that the conditions in an urban forest are far removed from the native conditions that were here before we civilized the land, right? So if we were to jump into a time machine and kind of crank back the clock before all this development and neighborhoods and communities and cities were built, would we see a heavily forested area with lots of shade trees? The answer is no, actually. We don't live in a climate that has a lot of native shade trees available. So, as you said, species diversity is important. I would go a step further. I would say species diversity is critical to the long-term sustainability of an urban forest. There's roughly 200 plus species of tree growing in Los Angeles. And species diversity is our greatest weapon in maintaining a long-term sustainable forest, because if we were only to plant native trees, let's say we have about a dozen or so native trees, and most of those were located near riparian corridors or areas where there's flowing water. If we only planted native trees, then we'd only have about a dozen species, right? And so say a pest or a pathogen or disease comes through, that would mean that large percentages of our entire urban forest would be vulnerable. And historically in America, we've seen this case over and over again, right? With American elms and the American chestnut, where an invasive or domestic pest that has risen to certain levels, certain thresholds, wipes out entire swaths of the living forest. That's something that's simply untenable. We're in a climate crisis, and the people who are going to feel the brunt of those heat illness and climate effects are the people who are generally least equipped to deal with them. The people who are living in areas that there's a lot less green space and a lot less shade. And I could go on and on about the benefits of trees, but really the spirit of the question here is to address natives versus non-natives. Now, why aren't more native trees stocked in nurseries? I'm not a nursery grower, but there is some things I know about, nursery growers. And one of the primary things that's relevant to this question is that nurseries operate on often a razor thin profit margin, right? They have to anticipate consumer demands. And so they're only going to stock things that sell. And the things that sell are our most common non-native species, often like magnolias and jacarandas, crepe myrtles. In fact, if you looked at the top 10 most planted species in Los Angeles, you'd basically see a quarter of our entire urban forest within those top 10 non-native species. And so once again, I really want to hammer down this point. Species diversity is so critically important to our urban forest. And anecdotally, I got to say, I have seen a lot more native species in local nurseries. I think the native aesthetic is gaining some traction in the mainstream, and that's sort of kind of enforced by restricted water use and warming climate. And I think that hopefully we continue that trend, because native is beautiful, and it's native trees play a central role in the future of our urban forest, as well as non-native, non-invasive species. All right, next question. What is the best and worst part of your job? So this is a tough question, because there's so many, and for two different reasons. There's so many things I love about my job as a community forestry foreman for TreePeople, and so it's difficult to kind of decide. And as far as the worst things, even the worst things are mostly pretty trivial in the grand scheme of our mission, and so they don't really bear. But the question, I'll start with the worst, because I don't want to leave you with the worst, right? So I guess I wouldn't want to say the worst part of my job. I would say the most challenging part of my job would be the fact that if you want to do any good in this world or in your community, that often means that you have to confront some of those ugly realities that you care so much about, that you want to address, right? Whether it's homelessness or mental health or criminal justice reform or environmental justice, right? If you want to make a difference and take on the issue, that means every day you have to be confronted with the ugly realities of those issues. TreePeople operates where they're needed most, in areas that are underserved, in areas where they're not particularly affluent or have a lot of resources as well. And so it's tough to sometimes walk these streets and see, communities that are bereft of really robust urban forests. And the reasons behind those, when we understand them, is there's no reason why certain areas should have more coverage than others. There really isn't. We all live in the same ecosphere, basically. So it's really up to us to sort of enlist the help of the residents, to give them the tools to take charge and become involved in their, and demand that more green space is allotted for these communities, and we create more tree wells, and we populate our parks with additional trees to help cool down the neighborhoods. And that kind of leads me into the best part of my job. So, and there's so many great parts of my job, but the best part of my job is there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes when we're trying to get trees in the ground. We're not simply coming out to a parkway, putting a tree in the ground and taking a photo and leaving. We have to secure funding. We have to secure nursery stocks and negotiate contract terms. We have to staff personnel. We have to evaluate the land. We have to take utilities into account and get them on board. We have to negotiate with cities to allow us to operate on city land and plant city property. We have to maintain these trees, even if they're dying or if they're vandalized or if they're, or if they're sick, we have to replace them. There's so many things that go into planting trees. It's a huge production. But when it comes to volunteer day, when we're all set and done and we got all our ducks in a row and we're ready to invite the public out, and you see people coming out of their house, whether they registered or not, and they bring their kids, and maybe certain people who've lived on the same street their whole life, they haven't even really interacted with one another. They're getting to know each other. They're, working together to put trees in the ground. Man, that's where it's at. That's the best feeling that we have. And part of my job is I get to witness that like all the time, and it really never stops being amazing. And so, if you've never come out to any of our planting events, if you've never come out to any of our tree care events or tree distribution events, please, I would love to see you guys out there, either in El Monte or anywhere in LA where we're operating, Riverside, Colton, Rialto, all those places. Please do come out and witness what we have, witness our movement. We have so many amazing, incredible people at TreePeople who are applying their talents and passions to getting the trees in the ground. And it's something that's extraordinarily rewarding for me. So that's definitely the best part of my job. Next question. This kumquat tree was pruned a month ago. Should I prune the new shoots and small group of leaves below the canopy? So let's talk about why we prune, right? So generally we prune trees because we want a certain look, a cosmetic. Trees generally, trees have been around for quite some time, right? We weren't around pruning them and taking care of them for a long time. So they do well enough without us. They have physiological responses to, balance their root to shoot ratio. They also have all these responses to grow as much leaves as they need to support themselves. And so when you prune a tree, it's really important that you prune it. You don't over prune, first of all. You don't want to rob the tree of all its resources. And secondly, you want to time the pruning for times when the tree would not be undergoing any heat stress or anything. So this tree was pruned a month ago. It looks nice and tidy and high and tight, right? And if you look at the base of this tree, you'll actually see what's called the grafting point. This grafting point is where the rootstock of one species of kumquat was fused together, called grafted, together with the trunk and canopy of another species. This is extremely common in our industry. You take the rootstock from a tree that has a really healthy, robust rootstock, and one from you take the top off a tree that has really nice palatable fruit. You fuse them together, and you get like a super hybrid. It's wonderful, and it's an ancient practice. So if you do see any new shoots coming from below the graft point, if you see any the graft union, I should say, then you should absolutely 100% prune those away, because that will lead to more growth of the rootstock, below the graft point, and that's a graft union, and that's not what we want. They also rob nutrients from the upper canopy. Now, if you see any growth above that graft union, now it comes into more of a personal choice, right? Would I leave these shoots? I think so, I would. And the reason is because trees require, or at least they benefit from, internal complexity, right? Lateral branches on the inside of the trees and new shoots on the inside of the trees provide additional photosynthesis and nutrients and add diameter and caliper to the trunks internally. They also shade the vulnerable inside trunks from sunburn. Yeah, that's right. Trunks can get sunburned, especially thin bark species like magnolias and citrus trees. That's often why you see in orange orchards or citrus orchards, whitewashed trunks, is because it helps cool down the trunks from sun damage. So What I would like to do is allow this tree to kind of fully flesh out. What you want is complexity, not conflict, right? So you want some complexity on the inside of the canopy, but not branches rubbing into each other, breaking or bending under each other's weight, right? So it's a little bit of a balance, but for a small kumquat tree like this, it shouldn't be that difficult to take care of. A couple more things I wanted to point out that weren't in the question, but I see from the photo. One is this tree is in a pot, and so its resources are somewhat limited than a tree that would be in the ground. It goes into a reduced nutrient cycling. It can't get water from the surrounding soil space. It's very contained. And you also have what looks to be some lilies or irises that are planted around the base of the tree. What I'll say is, if you really want to look out for the health of this tree, long-term health, I would recommend removing some of that competing plant material from the base of that tree. The reason is that those plants at the base of the tree are competing for the same water and the same amount of nutrients that the tree is. Now, if you take a close look, it might be difficult to see from the photo, but if you take a really close look at those leaves, you'll start to see a little bit of yellowing in between the veins. Now, this is called intraveinal chlorosis. Chlorosis is the dieback of chloroplasts, which create the green pigments that are responsible for photosynthesis, right? So anytime you see yellowing in between the veins of certain trees, especially with fruit trees and citrus, that's generally points to a deficiency, whether it's iron or manganese or zinc. That means that there's some sort of micronutrient that the tree is not receiving because its soil volume is so limited, and it may, of course, be competing with for nutrients from that plant material at its base. So I'd really strongly urge you to take out that planting material, and the tree may benefit from an application of a citrus blend. There's all kinds of citrus blends. You can get them from Lowe's, Home Depot, of fertilizers. And be sure to follow the instructions on the fertilizer package. A lot of people will get a little too eager with fertilizer applications. And what can happen is, if you over fertilize a tree, it can actually burn the roots and harm the tree, which is counterintuitive. You think, hey, more fertilizer is better, right? But it's quite the opposite. Fertilizers chemically are effectively salts. And so they can pull moisture out of the roots, which is the reverse of what you want to happen, of course, and burn the roots over time. And so, I would recommend removing the plant material, allowing the tree to kind of flush out a little bit more. And, but that's my own preference. If you want to keep it high and tight, that's totally your decision, fertilizing it should be able to carry it through any kind of trauma that the pruning cycle would do to it. Good question, though. All right, next question. All right. We have a sycamore tree in the parkway in front of our newly constructed house. With all the rain and wind this winter, the stakes have blown loose, and the tree is now rubbing against one of the stakes. This is causing an open wound. Also, the leaves have spots on them. How do I, 1, fix the stakes wound issue, and 2, heal the spots? So before we get into care of this tree, I will say something. So if this tree is planted in the parkway in front of the house, that is to say, it's within the easement, the 10-foot easement of the street, then that is technically city property. And if the tree is growing in city property, it really would benefit you to check in with your city first before doing anything to the trees. Generally, cities frown upon residents taking care or to prune the trees or treat the trees unless they're watering them, in which case they're all about that. But aside from that, you've pointed out something that is a pretty common problem, actually. So a lot of cities and other entities have specifications that require staking trees. Stakes are the wooden posts that we plant place either right up against the tree or just offset of the tree in order to support the tree as it becomes established. This is a non-rigid stake. So the stake is outside of the root ball, and it's tied to the tree with some rubber or horticultural tape, something that's flexible and broad enough to allow the tree to sway in the wind. It's really, really important that the tree be allowed to sway in the wind, because just like animals and humans, we get stronger by moving. So it's a different mechanism. So it's not, the analogy is not perfect, but trees take the stimuli from their weight or wind or rain or snow on their branches and develop responsive growth, what's called reaction wood, along the longitudinally up the trunk and on the branches as well. This makes the tree stronger and grow in response to those loads, so it can support itself over time. So what happens is, if stakes are left on for too long, the tree will never get strong on its own. And eventually, if the stakes do rot away or are removed, you have a tree that has not got enough stimuli from the environment to strengthen itself over time. And so you'll have something that can potentially fail or break or sag, and we don't want that. However, having said that, if you leave the stakes on too long, this is exactly what can happen, right? The branches can kind of rub against the stake and cause a chronic wound. And unfortunately, not from the picture isn't clear. I'm not sure the location of the wound relative to the growth of the tree, but anytime I would see a wound that's that bad, I would probably look to subordinate the limb or leader or remove that piece of the wood, because that open wound can become a chronic vector for disease, right? Also, I would really determine whether or not the tree even needs its stake anymore, because like I said, once a tree is established, all the stake does is potentially harm the tree like it's doing here, or keep it from growing stronger in response to the wind. Second part of the question is, we have what appears to be either tar spot or a insect damage to the tree. And I'm going to put my money on tar spot. So tar spot is one of the very many foliar fungal diseases that since this year has just exploded in population or spread, because of all the moisture and the rain we had this year after so many years of drought. And so we're seeing pest populations, funguses, phytoplasms and slime molds and all stuff, spread a lot farther than they normally are. And so this is caused by a particular type of fungus. It is a foliar fungus, but the good news is actually it's not going to harm the tree. Cosmetically and temporarily, it looks a little unsightly, but there are really no really effective long-term chemical controls or organic controls for this type of fungus. Once it's in the leaves, there's not really much getting rid of it. But the good news is that sycamores are deciduous, so they will drop these infected leaves over time. And if the best management practice at that point is to make sure that you're not allowing the leaves to accumulate over the under the base of the tree. Now, generally, we love to let leaf litter accumulate under the base of trees, because it effectively mulches the trees, and mulch has so many benefits for trees. If you took nothing else away from today, take this: mulch your trees, because mulch is like the closest thing to a silver bullet in our industry that we have. I mean, every year there's all kinds of new products and stuff that promise all kinds of things with tree growth or tree vitality. Nothing beats mulch, honestly. So please do mulch your trees. Having said that, this is probably the exception to the rule, right? We do not, while mulch is fine, we don't want to allow leaf litter that's infected with fungal spores to overwinter at the base of the tree, because that increases the likelihood of reinfection the next growing season or the next year. So I would say, after these leaves drop, rake away the leaves. Make sure that your tree is mulched by not those leaves, and that the tree is growing well. If you can, talk your city into removing that stake, or fixing, removing that branch, or maybe simply allowing it to heal by cutting the stake shorter while still maintaining the stake ties if it's still unstable. And I think that would be the best thing I could offer is advice-wise for this particular tree. But again, remember, if it is in the parkway, it may be city property, so it might not be an issue that you want to undertake. Cool. All right. Any more slides? Oh, okay, wow. So those are the slides that we have for today. I know we have a lot of questions in the chat, so I really want to jump into that. But before I do that, I just wanted to thank you guys first and foremost for submitting those photos. I love talking trees. If you had an issue that wasn't or won't be addressed today, please send those issues to us at info@treepeople.org. I would love to. I'm going to be here all day. I'm going to be answering questions. I want to make sure that you get the value from this process. From this presentation, and if not right now, the next time as well. Cool. Adam?
Cool. And again, thank you so much. This has been really, really wonderful. I know that I learned a lot by watching this, and I just want to give a huge shout out again to Dashboard.Earth for making this possible. Juliana just put the link to the app in the chat. Please give it a download. It is a wonderful, wonderful tool to help make a difference. Especially here in Southern California, and find ways that you can really do wonderful work, not only towards building a better climate, but in the community. So I just want to shout out again, Dashboard.Earth one more time. And I think we're going to get into some questions here. Brian, do you want me to just read them off, or do you want to, I know that I sent you some.
Yeah, I did receive some of those. So I'm going to answer these as quickly and succinctly as possible. We got a lot of questions. I want to make sure I get to as many as possible. And again, if we can't, please do reach out to us. We'd love to offer some more guidance whenever possible. Number one question you sent me, how do I hire a licensed arborist? There is an incredible resource called treesaregood.org. And this is a directory that is made public by the ISA, especially the Western chapter of ISA, which is our local chapter. And you have a directory of certified arborists, tree risk assessors, and even board certified master arborists who are in the area. They're available to hire. One thing I always like to tell clients or people, if I can't get to their problems, get a variety of bids. Sometimes arborists can be slightly more costly than we have a budget for, and so that's kind of one of the reasons why we're trying to do these outreach things, is that we're trying to get to as many inquiries or questions or concerns as possible. So if we can answer your question, or you need a certified arborist to come out and either work your tree or evaluate your tree or determine whether or not it's a hazard, treesaregood.org is a wonderful resource. If you and also, we're making similar resources available through TreePeople as well. So it's always helpful to reach out. But yeah, that's how you hire a licensed arborist or a certified arborist as well. Number two, I'm having landscaping done, and they've cut a lot of lateral roots to my huge Chinese elm and magnolia. Will they be okay? Man, oh gosh, this is one of the main things that we have to deal with as arborists in the industry, is construction or utility people coming through and damaging roots. And I would love to tell you that your tree will be okay, and it may very well be okay, but it definitely determines on how big those lateral roots are. If they injure large conduction roots that are close to the base of the tree, then not only are we creating an issue for the health of the tree, but also we may be causing a hazard potential for that tree. Remember, there's so many functions of roots, and and it's not just water conduction, it's anchorage as well. So I would love to see if you could send us some photos. Perhaps we can help you determine whether or not how egregious those cuts are. And if we can't do it, then I would very strongly recommend an arborist come out and take a look at those roots to see if there's anything that can be done for your tree. Once roots are cut, there's unfortunately very few options we have to kind of help the tree through that. It's an extremely traumatic experience to cut large roots on the base of a tree. And so some species can endure root cuts better than others. Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you exactly about the Chinese elm and magnolia. Both of those are very generally durable trees. And so hopefully they will make it past there. But the problem with roots being cut is also, it doesn't solve the issue. If you're looking to cut roots because they're maybe interfering with your walkway or utility lines, tree roots are living. They're gonna try and find moisture wherever they can. If there's moisture, they'll find it. And so that is something we have to consider when we're planting trees and how we're spacing them as well. So once again, I would love for you to, either send us some photos and maybe we can help you a little bit more with that query, or you might want to take some action, have an arborist come out, evaluate the health of your roots, and make sure that the tree is not a hazard at this point, because that is a very real possibility. Okay. I have an Afrocarpus hedge about 20 feet high. How much water do they need in the summer? It's really important that we water our trees in the summer. Why is that? Well, up till now, there's been some water restrictions on how we can, water our landscapes. And so a lot of people just turned off their valves, and a lot of our trees really suffered because of that. I should say the city does make exemptions specifically for watering trees. So please do water your trees whenever you can. If it's dry, a good rule of thumb is go out to the base of your tree, stick your finger down a couple inches, or maybe dig a little bit in the base without injuring any roots, of course, and check to see if the soil is extremely dry. 85% of all the root mass of a tree is going to be in the top 18 inches of soil. So if it's really dry and dusty, then it needs a long, slow soak. And that's another thing I want to get across to you guys, is that infrequent deep waterings are far, far better than shallow, frequent waterings, because you want the water to slowly absorb into the soil over time, to infiltrate and percolate through the soil profile in order to feed those roots deeply and retain in that soil for a long period of time. So I would say, as a general rule, you're probably going to want between 10 and 15 gallons per week on your mature tree, unless the soil is already moist. Then I would say leave it alone. And once again, infrequent, maybe every couple weeks to once a month, a deep watering and then letting it go is ideal. Next question. I have a magnolia tree in a 5-gallon pot. Is it okay to plant it now? And how close to my house or pool? So magnolias can get very massive. In fact, the minimum planting standards that we have for magnolias are 10 by 10 cutouts, right? So that's 100 square feet. So I don't think it's really wise to plant it right next to your house, unless it's a dwarf variety, or what's called little gem. Magnolias is the most widely planted ornamental tree on the face of the planet, actually. And so there's a lot of cultivated varieties that are meant to stay smaller. So if you're going to plant a smaller specimen, it's okay to plant it next to your house. But if it's your standard run-of-the-mill Magnolia grandiflora, you're going to want to give it a lot of space because they will take up that space. It's an awesome shade tree. They're very durable, like I said. Make sure not to over prune them, because they do have very thin bark, and we don't want sun scald on those trees, or sunburn on those trees as well. So yeah, I would say if it's in a 5-gallon pot, it's ready to go. Make sure if it's still in a pot, if it's in original black liner, that you're not leaving that black liner out in the sun, because they absorb heat and that can lead to root death as well. That's something that a lot of people in nurseries, and they'll bring a tree home and they'll leave it out in the sun, and then all of a sudden the tree takes a dive because its root mass is afflicted with a heat illness. All right. Are there general non-pesticide approaches to protecting saplings from bugs? Yeah, absolutely. So there are, I should say, any substance that you use on a tree, whether it's organic or non-organic, is technically a pesticide. If it's used to control a pest, it is a pesticide. Now, if it's synthetic or organic, those things can both be harmful or non-harmful based on application times and application specifications. But as far as general non-pesticide approaches to protecting saplings, bugs are ubiquitous in the environment, honestly. You can try to put a screen over your young sapling if you're trying to keep, get it established before it gets predated by bugs. But, a healthy sapling should be able to fend off bugs as long as they're not stressed by a variety of other issues, right? It's usually not one thing that'll kill a tree. It's usually a combination of stressors that will lead to the decline of a tree. So, there's manual things you can do, like screens, horticultural oils that are not toxic are another option. Yeah. How much time do we have left, Adam?
I think we're over by a little bit. So let's try to maybe just do one last question, and then anything else, either send us an email at info@treepeople.org or download the Dashboard.Earth app. And you can submit your questions through there, and we will be holding more of these Ask an Arborist talks. So we'll make sure to get through there get to those on there as well. Again, thank you so much. And I think we just have time for one last question.
Cool. All right. Last question. Do young coast live oaks need structural pruning? Yes, absolutely. And so what you want to do, generally you don't need to prune young trees when you transplant them. It actually could be stressful to a tree to reduce its photosynthetic capacity right as it's becoming established, right? Having said that, if you get a plant from a nursery and it has competing leaders or poor angles of attachment, broken or diseased limbs or conflicting limbs internally, then yes, that's what's called structural pruning. And you're basically heading off any long-term issues with competing leaders or codominant stems or included bark well before they develop. And so I would definitely, I think we're probably going to do a guide on young tree pruning at one point if we don't already have those resources available on TreePeople. But yeah, young coast live oaks, do they need structural pruning necessarily? Well, it's as needed, right? If there's defects, if there's disease, if there's broken limbs, stuff like that, then yes, those should be corrected. Usually during the summer when soil moisture is low, because that's when oaks are generally less susceptible to Phytophthora, which is a fungus-like organism that thrives in moist environments. And so yes, you'd want to prune out any defective limbs or diseased limbs. Otherwise, let it go and do its thing. And once again, thank you so much. I'm so sorry if we didn't get your question today. Please do submit those questions to info@treepeople.org. We will do our very, very best to get you those timely answers, and we look forward to seeing you at the next presentation.
And again, thank you so much for Dashboard.Earth for being a partner on this. Download the app. Hopefully you can use it to find new ways to engage with climate solutions in your area. It's absolutely wonderful, and we loved having them on board today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.